in the world. It's called Vantage Point. We have $4.6 billion deployed in that space, and I'm on the board of a number of its portfolio companies. One of them is a company called BrightSource, which is building the biggest solar thermal plant in the world right now. It's 2.7 gigawatts, and we have power purchase agreements with in California with Southern California Edison and Pacific Gas and Electric, and we're going to build it in 2 years. And of course, it takes, to build a coal plant takes 10, to build a new plant takes 15 or 20. And we're building at a price that is about $3 billion a gigawatt, which is the same price you pay for a coal plant. A nuke plant will cost 15 to 20. But it's a combination solar gas plant, because what we do, it's not like solar voltaic. It's a turbine that we just take from a gas plant, suspend it from a big scaffolding, a tower, and surround it by giant mirrors in the desert that are manipulated by computers to always shine the sunlight, so that a half hour after the sun gets up in the morning, we can get that turbine to 750 degrees Fahrenheit. But if a cloud passes over, or during the evening, the utility wants a base load. And the way that we're going to deliver that base load is by powering it with gas. We're building these all over the country, and one of the questions we ask, we need about 3,000 foot in altitude. We need flat land, we need 300 days of sunlight, and we need to be near a gas pipe. Because, for all of these big utility scale power plants, whether it's wind or solar, everybody is looking at gas as the supplementary fuel. The plants that we're building, the wind plants and the solar plants, are gas plants. And one of the other solutions to our energy issue in this country is distributed power. And the best way, which means you have a little power plant in your home. And the most efficient power plants, one of them, in the province of Alberta, they're trying to install these in, all of the homes in their power grid. Is a little power plant that's about this big, and it's made by a company called Whispergen. And it's a little gas power plant that has a Stirling engine on top of it that generates electricity. And you put one of these in your home. I have a completely green house. My house itself is a power plant. It's powered by geothermal. I have 2 solar systems on my roof, and I have a supplementary propane tank. My house generates a lot more energy than it uses, and I sell that back to the grid. And I'm building a cottage next to it, and it's going to be powered by a Whispergen engine, which is natural gas, and natural gas is the most efficient form of distributed energy that we have. And so we have the capacity to really to move to this new energy economy, but we need a partnership. To me, this is a godsend, because you're a huge industry. You're much bigger than the coal industry, and if we could actually deploy your resources to make this transition possible, I've been fighting for 25 years on Capitol Hill. With, the entire environmental community probably has a budget of, for lobbying of maybe $5 or $10 million a year. And if we can, make partnership with your industry and go into the senator's office and the congressman's office together, we have the capacity to, to really change this country and to make this country what all of us believe that it ought to be, which is energy independent. If we don't have to send that $1 billion a day over to Saudi Arabia and to other countries, we could keep it here, and we can reinvest in our communities, in our hospitals, in our roads, in our police protection, in building a national grid and making ourselves energy independent in our country, and really being an example to the rest of humanity, and making ourselves really the exemplary nation that all of us believe that we ought to be. And your industry ought to be playing a key role in making that transition happen. And it's got to be ultimately a relationship built on trust. Now, a couple of years ago, I talk about fracking. A couple of years ago, I was talking with a friend of mine from the natural gas industry, and he was an old hand, and he said to me, all of these issues with fracking, that people claim, we don't really think it's from fracking. The houses, the gas coming out of people's faucets, and the houses blowing up, and however rare that is, it has happened, and the poisoning their wells and this kind of thing. Well, he said, they're coming from old stripper wells, or they're coming from places where there's always been methane in the groundwater table, and we're getting blamed for it. But I have to say this: I went to a guy who works for me at Riverkeeper, and I said, listen, I want you to go around the country and to find out whether this is true or not, because I was getting hundreds and hundreds of complaints from local people, particularly after, I made public statements saying natural gas is our friend. I got a lot of mail from people, and a lot of it was hate mail from local people who said, you got to come out to my community and see what's happened. And I went to Dimmock, Pennsylvania, and I went to Eden, Wyoming, and I went all over the country. And I looked and I found out that this is real. There is a real problem with fracking. Now, maybe, I don't know why, there's three issues with it. The first issue is a water management issue. And that has to do with frack water and what goes into the fracking fluids. And your industry needs to be straight up and honest about that. You got to differentiate yourself from big coal, which is, everybody considers them a liar. You got to come up and be honest about that and say, here's what we're using. But there's a water management issue. Where do you get the water? And then what happens to the produce water when it comes out of ground? If you're putting in a sewage treatment plant in Pennsylvania, those sewer plants aren't designed to remove, any of that stuff that's in the fracking fluids, and so it's going to breed distrust. One of the reasons I got involved with this is I'm on the board of one of these companies. There was a very good one, and some of the guys that are here are 212 Resources that they can bring a reactor to the site of a wellhead, and they can clean up the frac fluids and oil. They have a distillation technology. They clean it up for a couple of pennies a gallon and make it potable water. You can literally drink it out of a Dixie cup. But they're not the only company doing that. There's GE has a company that does it, and a number of other competitors out there that are doing this, but those technologies are available. Once you do that, it also helps eliminate, one of the other big impacts, which is the road travel, because if you got 1,500 or 1,600 truck trips coming into that site, people are going to be angry about that, and it's going to get a lot of community anger. If you can reduce that to 60 truck trips, which you can using these technologies, it helps the situation a lot. You've got a water management issue. You've got a methane migration issue. And this is a real issue, no matter what people say. And now, I don't know why it's happening. It may be failures of the casing, but it's probably almost certainly not coming from, from the Marcellus Shale or from those deep shale beds. But somewhere on the way down, if you get a high pressure zone and it migrates up the side of the casing and then finds it finds a way out into people's homes. And we've got to figure out, and the industry has to be honest about that and says, yes, this is happening, and we're going to try to find out, not just deny it, find out why it's happening, and then get a portfolio of best available technologies that we can all agree on, and then go to the regulators and say, here's the way that we're going to prevent that from happening on a widespread. There's always going to be accidents, but on a widespread basis. Number three, and this is one of the biggest issues, is the industrialization of the landscapes. People, who live on these, particularly you're moving into suburban areas, you're moving into areas where people live, and that disturbs people. So, I personally am for pooling. I think that we've got to figure out a formula for pooling so that you only have one wellhead per square mile, and we've got to make that profitable for the industry and make it rational for the industry. Other environmental groups are just dead set against it. I believe we need to sit down with them and really figure out a way to make pooling work. But all of these issues are solvable. But we need to open up a dialogue, and then we need people to stand by their word. If you say to me, we're going to go and try to do to support the FRAC Act and make it so that that we're going to disclose these fracking fluids, then when I show up there, I don't want to be alone after 5 people told me that they were going to come with me, and they just don't show up that morning. So and you may have read a comment I made about that one day when I was particularly pissed off. But look, I have a I've been to Eden, Wyoming, and I've been hunting there for sage grouse with falcons, which is something that I do, and I love that area. And there's a lot of Halliburton wells there, and the sage grouse populations are plummeting. But probably the biggest threat to sage grouse is coming from wind farms. There's a wind farm being built near my home in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, and I've been opposed to it. And I'm opposed to it because it's going to put out of business every fisherman on the South Cape of Massachusetts. Also, economically, it doesn't make any sense. But they're putting it in the center of fishing ground where 63% of the catch come and they go, and the fishermen aren't going to be able to get their gear. And I've represented fishermen. That's how I got into the environmental community. I've represented commercial fishermen for 25 years, and we have the oldest commercial fishery, one of the oldest in North America on the Cape, 350 years old. They're small family operations, and they contribute not just to the palate of the Cape, but to the culture of the Cape, and I don't want to see this thing built. But if you say to me, are you against wind power? No, I'm all for wind power. I think it's a great thing, but I recognize that any kind of large-scale energy operation is going to impose costs on our society. If you say to me, does fracking, cause people to have fire coming out of their faucets, I'm going to say, yeah, that happens. It happens occasionally. But am I against fracking? No, I'm not. But I do think that we need to work together to minimize the amount of times that happens. And to start that, we need to have a relationship that's based on trust, where when you do something, tell me you're going to do something, that you do it. And there may be many times when you come to me and say, Bobby, we can't do that. We're part of the oil industry too, and this is going to cause problems for us, and we can't do it. And I understand that. But I am for natural gas. But I need to protect I protect grassroots people in their communities. And if you guys came to me and saw the way these people have to live in Dimock, Pennsylvania, with these Rube Goldberg devices in their basements, and they're feeding their babies benzene and all this other stuff, you'd be as horrified as I am. And we can't, that's going to happen. It's going to happen occasionally, but as a group, what we need to do is the same thing with wind. We need to say, yeah, there's going to be problems. These are going to kill sage grouse. They're going to occasionally get in migration areas and kill some birds. There's going to be little brown bats that are going to be reduced. We got to put these in areas that make sense, where you mitigate those, and we got to build them in such a way that the mitigation really works. But I don't care what kind, and you build these solar plants in the desert Southwest, there's desert tortoises out there. Any way that you make energy, you're going to impose cost. It doesn't mean I'm against solar, and it doesn't mean I'm against natural gas, because I'm honest about the costs that are being imposed. But all of us need to be honest about that, and then we need to go forward as a single group and say that natural gas makes the most sense for our society. It makes the most sense for preserving the values of our country, for making America an exemplary nation, for making us independent so that we don't have to, genuflect to these sheiks in Saudi Arabia who despise democracy and are hated by their own people, and then spill this all over the Gulf and Valdez and, get in wars that cost us $4.3 trillion. There's better ways to make energy, and we have them right here in this country, and they're solar, they're wind, they're geothermal, and they are natural gas. And all of those things combined